Good afternoon and welcome to this third in series of looks at the future of orchestras as part of the EUYO's 2020 Summer Digital Residency. Today and now it's time for us to look at the idea of orchestras from the viewpoint of composers. And it's great news that we have with us Hannah Kendall, our composer in residence. Hello, Hannah. And
Hello.
Also, if the connection is working, we've also got composer Joan Tower. Joan, I wonder if you're there. Joan, hi.
That's
great.
Here. I don't know how long, though.
Yeah, so Joan's connection is a little bit iffy at the moment, so she's here now, which is great. I think all I need to do at this stage is disappear and leave you two ladies to start thinking about the question, what is the relationship between composers and orchestras going to be like in the future? What could it be like? What should it be like? And I think I would say over to you two now.
Thanks, Marshall. Joan, it would be wonderful to start the conversation with you about this. I feel as though my relationship with orchestras has actually changed and evolved ever since I've started composing, and I wonder how you feel about it.
Well, I've been around orchestras a long time. I was in residence with St. Louis for 3 years, and then St. Luke's in New York for 10 years, and then Pittsburgh for 1 year, and Albany for 1 year, and also did a tour with 65 community orchestras. So my experience is pretty broad and long and challenging. I think the orchestra world is a little afraid of composers because they're afraid of the risk involved of taking on something they're not sure about always. And that's always been a problem of risk. You know, the chamber music world, the small ensemble world, is more willing to take that risk because it's a smaller operation and doesn't have high budgets to deal with and stuff like that. But I think the orchestra world needs to take more risks with living composers. Still, they're doing better. And there's some orchestras that are completely devoted to composers, living composers, a few. And thank them for the repertoire because they produce the initial repertoire and they take a lot of risks, always. So, like the American Composers Orchestra, the Cabiria Festival Orchestra. And in Europe, do you have an orchestra that's devoted to living composers?
Okay, there's quite a bad delay, so I hope I think I managed to catch everything that you said, and I think you said a few interesting things. And actually, because I am living in New York at the moment, even though I'm in London, I have noticed that there is a difference between in Europe and in the United States, which is really interesting. And something that I was so grateful for when I started out composing is that a lot of our orchestras have development programs for young composers. And because, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned risk and you know, somehow working with living composers is deemed to a certain extent a risk. And I suppose, you know, one way, the most important way of getting better and, you know, developing your practice at working with orchestras is having the opportunity to work with them over an extended period of time. And so I was very lucky as a younger composer to have opportunities with the Philharmonia and the London Philharmonic Orchestra in particular. And I think it was those opportunities of working with them over an extended period of time that has, you know, built up my confidence in writing for the ensemble, and actually having and growing like a deep love for writing orchestral works and working with such large forces.
What? Tell me about those good experiences. Can you tell me about one or two of them? Why was
about the good experiences? Well, I think that when it's a really good experience, it's when the players and, well, the whole orchestra really, not just the players, but those in administration as well, are open to trying things out, to trying new things out. I suppose I don't know, like whether orchestras could be viewed as being different ecosystems really, and so every orchestra will work in different ways, and when I find that when you can have really open conversation, so for example, working with EUYO has certainly been like that, when I'm able to openly discuss my ideas, not only just about the music, but also about the concept of the work as well, which might be difficult to discuss. So for example, drawing, like for me personally, what's important is drawing together my African Caribbean heritage as well as my European identity, and drawing those aspects together and working within a Western classical idiom. And I found like being able to talk openly about that has been really encouraging recently, because that's such an important part of the work that I'm doing at the moment. So yeah, how about you?
That's great. That's great. Well, I think a lot of the orchestras don't have that kind of time, to try things out and to discuss the possibilities of this or that, because the higher up you go in the orchestra world, the time frame gets shorter and shorter and shorter. So there's a lot of emphasis on the page. The page has to say everything, but when you're working with people like the EUYO and like I worked with Orpheus. Can you hear me? Okay. The Orpheus Chamber Ensemble from New York. It's a conductorless orchestra, and that was an amazing experience, because first of all, their investment in the piece is much higher, because they are a chamber group. So they have to be responsible for their section, their leadership of each section. And it's something they've worked out over a long, long period of time. But that kind of process that they have makes all the players much more engaged in the piece, because they have to take responsibility for everything. And so I traveled with them and worked on the piece and changed things. So that kind of situation makes the composer much more engaged and more welcomed and more part of the process of making changes, for example. So, and if you have a conductor, see, I think it starts a lot with the conductor. If the conductor is really interested in the piece and genuinely committed to the piece, then you're starting off very high ground level. And if they're just sight reading or kind of doing it because they have to do a new piece that season kind of thing, you know it right away, So I think the participation of the conductor and their actual commitment and the ability to take the risk with that piece is essential, because it starts at the top there with the conductor. And that will get the orchestra much more engaged. And I've had several experiences with conductors, major conductors like that. And I've had the opposite of, oh, we have to do this piece, let's get it over with kind of thing. So the conductor is essential. And I would like to say about conductors that they have to believe in the piece. They have to do some research. They have to listen to a lot of pieces and see what they like. And then they have to stand alone with that. That's where it gets tricky, because their opinion is alone. They're alone with that decision. And that's where they're not sure to go, because they're not always sure that their opinion is, I mean, they know that Beethoven's Seventh is their favorite, Beethoven symphony, or the Brahms 4, whatever. But they're always not sure about their opinion of living composers. So they have to listen to music and make decisions and think about what they really genuinely like musically, not professionally, not like, oh, this is a famous composer, or this is a composer who's been around a long time, that kind of thing. But really listen to the music and say, I like this piece and I'm going to stand behind it, kind of thing. Was that all there, or was I just talking to the winds?
Oh no, it was a lot of it was there. I think there's a delay, so I was waiting for the end of your sentence, but yeah. But I think it is interesting to think about the relationship between composers and conductors as well, actually. And I think that that's something that I've realized most recently, actually. And I think it's just, it comes from logistics, that you get to speak to the conductor before that you meet the rest of the players as well. But actually, I found that, finding conductors that you really enjoy working with. I mean, I've worked with, obviously not as many conductors as you have, but quite a few. But it's really interesting when you build up a real rapport and a good working relationship, as well, and in some cases an actual friendship as well. I've certainly done that with the young American conductor, Jonathan Hayward, actually. And we just love working together so much that and I just feel so grateful for the investment that he puts into my music, and that he, I think you were saying about, listening to the music, to the new works that are being created. And I've noticed how that can make shifts with, the orchestras that you get to work with, and how also, the orchestra might respond to the composer themselves as well. Because there is that living, breathing relationship. When you go into when we go into the room, we're building, creative relationships with everyone in that room. And
that's right.
And when you have that rapport with the conductor, I've realized that it makes it such an invaluable and deeply satisfying experience, really. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Most of the time. It depends on what their relationship to their own orchestra is.
I wonder whether, I think it'd be good to hear from Marshall about that topic, actually. We might just bring him in on that.
Hi. Well, look, it is fascinating. Yeah, that from the orchestra's point of view, I certainly think when we're working with composers, we're always trying to make a proper relationship. To me, the worst thing is when you do a commission and then a composer writes it. You may not even meet them somehow until one of the rehearsals. And as an interesting example of how I rather do it was, for example, with Hannah this year, because of issues, we've done a commission, but she's already working with the orchestra. it will probably be a year before the piece is on. And I find that allows you to really start the relationship in a much more holistic way. One of the problems to me is this terrifying separation. So the composer's out there somewhere, from our point of view, doing their stuff, writing, and we're so used in the orchestra to active relationship. I don't know whether you hear me okay, Joan, but that's how I hear it. Now, I don't want to butt in too much in this conversation, but does that help, Hannah? I don't know whether you hear me okay, Joan, but that's how I hear it. Now, I don't want to butt in too much in this conversation, but does that help, Hannah?
I missed most of that. I'm sorry.
I did too. Sorry.
I wanted to hear that, but I missed most of it. Marshall, sorry.
I did too. Sorry.
Is that a baby? Do I hear a baby?
Hi. So we seem to be having a few technical problems on people hearing each other, which is why, unfortunately, rather than hearing two composers, which is the interesting thing, you've got me back in. I think our technical people are trying to work on this at the moment. And let's see if we bring back Hannah, if that will work. And then if that works, we would bring back Joan. So Hannah, has this improved at all, the tech, or do we still have, you can still hear me, that's a problem. Okay. Apologies, everybody, for this. We've been going so well up to now in these sessions, but I can hear there is a problem because the sound is coming back at us and nobody can hear each other. Hannah, I'm going to suggest that we leave you in on your own, maybe to chat with people for a bit whilst we go out and try and solve this. Let's see if that helps. Hannah, I'm going to suggest that we leave you in on your own, and maybe chat with people for a bit whilst we go out and try and solve this. That helps. Or is that not going to work? Okay. Hannah, I think maybe let's see if we can solve it from our end and come back in to you. So if you want to keep on talking to Daniele, and I'll stay here for the moment. Daniele, I don't know whether you can bring in Joan, and maybe Joan will work okay if I'm here. Joan, how is that? I'm really sorry. I do apologize. We've got some technical problems here.
I can hear you beautifully. Yeah.
You can hear me beautifully. Well, look, until we solve the other side.
Yeah.
Great. Until we solve the problem with Hannah, then let's just carry on. You were talking about the importance of conductors and orchestras. Just kind of bring us back to that, and I'll try and respond on that.
Well, I said that in my experience with working with conductors, I discovered over time that the level of commitment to them, to the composer, is super important. And it can take a lot of, I mean, with major orchestras and major conductors, they can get the job done. I mean, they're all professionals, they can get the job done. But it's the conductors who are really invested in this particular piece by so-and-so that they really care about and love, the same way they would love a Beethoven symphony. Then you get a different ball game.
Yeah. And
how that works is partly it is that they've composed themselves at some point or other, or they have a brother who's a composer who they've lived with for a long time, or they happen to really be curious about living composers. That kind of creates a different level right away. Welcomed right away.
That's very interesting. So do you think, it sounds like we should have a kind of education program for orchestras and conductors to kind of learn doing this? I don't know, it's very interesting. I mean, I was a violinist professionally for many years, and playing, for example, with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, we did a lot of contemporary music in the days of Boulez. And of course, you're right, the regularity of working with the live composers it's a skill. You learn that ability to do that. So I guess it's quite interesting. We had a previous session where somebody was talking about, it was Antonio Papano. He was talking about the importance of playing from an early age and getting that in your bloodstream. So I guess actually maybe one of the things we should be doing is that as we grow all these amazing youth orchestras for young kids, there should be young composers with them at the same time.
Exactly.
Then it becomes like breathing.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the professional orchestras. You work with Boulez for a long time. You started to get used to your opinions about pieces. I like that piece because it says something, and the other one, I don't understand that piece at all. You started to develop over some years with those composers opinions of your own. See, and that's the real key right there. There has to be real, genuine opinions about this piece versus that piece, the same way you do with Brahms and Beethoven, and we've got to get back to the curiosity, which somebody like Yo-Yo Ma, for example, has in space. He looks at something, he says, "Oh, I want to learn more about Brazilian drumming or whatever."
Yes.
He doesn't put the walls up and say, "Oh, this is as far as I go. I go to bar talk and that's it." It's a question of curiosity and a question of pursuing your own opinions about that piece.
That's so interesting, actually, because I've spent years and years on wall-to-wall 19th, 20th, 18th, 17th century music, but you're quite right. Actually, we're not realizing the price we're paying for our adherence and love of all those amazing composers from the past, and that we need to develop our listening skills. And I think what you said about remembering back to my period playing is so true. To begin with, if you don't mind me saying, it's all modern music to a lot of people. And then you develop, it's like a muscle. You develop the listening muscle. Okay, listen, I think we might be at a time when we can try bringing Hannah back and see how it goes. So I'll stay just for the moment. If Hannah is able to come back in, and let's see if this is any better, if it's the same.
Yes,
Hannah, welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel a very pale very, very bad substitute for having you. I like the idea of you two girls talking about this. So if that's good, I'm gonna disappear. I'm gonna leave you two to it. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Joan. Thank you. Joan, we've actually had a really interesting question that's come through from Simone, who asks, in times like these, how important is it to hear and learn from works like The Knife of Dawn and Fanfare for the Uncommon Woman? Well, maybe I should say The Knife of Dawn is my chamber opera. So I wrote that in 2016, and it's a chamber opera that I wrote based on Martin Carter, who was a Guyanese political activist and poet. And my mother's family is from Guyana, in South America, also considered part of the Caribbean, and that was the piece that was the turnaround for me, where I was actively trying to draw on those aspects that I mentioned earlier of looking to subject matter and narrative that could combine the multitude of influences that I'm interested in bringing into my music. So just to give you some background on what the Knife of Dawn is, and maybe I should say that is a piece that I actually produced myself, because sort of talking about, the open conversations that we have with ensembles and orchestras and those in charge of these institutions, I felt as though in order to create this work I wanted to create, I actually had to do it myself, rather you know, it didn't seem that it would be a piece that might have been commissioned. So, yeah.
Well, the mayor, I must have learned a lot from that. Just said. Learn about learning about things for the information. That's certainly learn some pieces if they what they want to learn from it. I'll just say something about the fanfare for the Uncommon one. There are 6
yes,
of them now.
please. Yeah.
And they are the impetus was one of the orchestras, the Houston Symphony. Am I being heard?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, okay, because I hear some background kids or something. I don't know what it is.
Oh, okay.
Do you hear that?
I think for me, there's a playground across the road, so maybe it's those children. But I'd be surprised if you could hear them.
I think I'm going.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. I'll just say a few words about the fanfares. There are 6 of them, and there are 2 for orchestra, 3 for brass ensemble, modeled on Copland's fanfare for the common man. And I decided, and 1 for 4 trumpets, 1 for, now there's another one for piano. My battery's running out. Oh, I got 20% battery. Yikes. Okay.
I think that should be okay.
I'll speak fast. So they were dedicated to women, phenomenally strong women, adventurous women who take risks and have visions about their musical lives. So I love that idea. Actually, now the fanfare for the uncommon woman. I love it. I'm glad I did it.
And could you, how do you feel about I don't know, sometimes I get some pushback on maybe so overtly talking about these subjects within the music. So you were saying that those that the series of works were specifically dedicated to women, and raising certain basically raising these issues in music. It's something that I'm still working through myself, and for me it feels genuine and organic, because these are issues that I'm genuinely interested in. But then I can get pushback on, focusing on the sounds that we're trying to create, and, abstracting those influences from the music itself. And I wondered whether, you've had, I don't know, criticism on that, or,
Yeah, I think unless you're using words have a power of getting political, social, racial, whatever you want to do. But the minute you take the words away, you have abstract instruments, right? So most pop music is verbal, right? It's verbal. It always has a story, a line, and an agenda of some kind. And so that makes it a politically powerful way to express things, right? But if you write just a straight orchestra piece or a string quartet, it takes away that agenda immediately. But then you can say, well, this is about this piece is about violence, or this piece is about love. And you can attach that to the title. You can say about love, whatever you can call it. And so right there, the words come back in to play a window role into the piece. But you know what? The piece still has to work. It doesn't matter what you attach to it. Even with verbal stuff, the music has to work itself. I believe a song in the music pulls its own weight, regardless of the agenda.
Yeah, I completely agree. However, I mean, obviously, the piece itself has to hold water, but then, well, I suppose when we're in situations like this, and audiences or anyone listening to the work is looking for a way into the music somehow, and I suppose on the other hand, it feels as though not necessarily that there has to be an agenda, but there might have to be some sort of subject matter or narrative connected to the music as a way of having discourse around it and discussing it, rather than, as opposed to, I just want to write a piece for the sake of writing a piece that happens to be for this collection of instruments, and even then, for example, you're asked for a program note or some sort of commentary on the work, and so I mean, I don't know. I'm sure my thoughts on the matter will evolve and change, and but I do always find that interesting. Because I personally do try to not necessarily put an agenda on a piece, but to make clear what my intentions are through writing the piece or through writing the music. But then I suppose it can sort of paint you into a corner. Maybe, I don't
know. We're lucky we're not in the art world. In the art world, they have these glossy magazines that explain a painting, like 5 pages of deep analysis of the work itself, and it's like a black box or something. And I think in the art world, you really have to be. I've noticed artists are incredibly articulate about their work, very, very articulate about what they do. But in our world, it used to be musicology was dominating. You'd read these deep analyses of these 12-tone pieces, or even tonal pieces, right? And so the theory and the musicology of classical music started to come forward in a big way. And when I was growing up, if you couldn't explain your piece, you were dead in the water. No. I went to Columbia, and I had all the serialists around me, and I had to read all these very heavy articles on, analytical thinking.
I'm at Columbia at the moment.
Yes.
I know.
I was a complete dummy. I couldn't figure out half of what they were talking about. Luckily, that all changed, and I could stop talking and stop explaining what I was doing, which was such a relief, because to me, it's some people are good at that, and they should be theorists and they should be musicologists, but to be a composer, it takes a lot of really strong, good intuition and sensing how to get their own voice forward from inside. It's not a top-down thing where people can tell you how to compose. Nobody can tell you how to compose. You have to figure that out yourself. So, anyways, that's a long-winded.
No, I think that's interesting, because actually, even though, as I said, I'm at Columbia now, and it does on the doctoral program. Yes. And so it sounds as though, obviously things have changed since you were there. But actually, we are expected to have, you know, I don't know, for obvious reasons, we are expected to have some instinct of, you know, of being a musicologist and a theorist as well as a composer. But whereas, you know, there isn't necessarily that same, you know, the same isn't really required of them, actually. And that's really interesting. I mean, yeah, so we still have qualifying exams that touch on musicology and theory, which is interesting. And they don't have any composition requirements, but that's just more a tongue-in-cheek observation rather than, you know, anything.
Do you still have to explain? Do you have to write a dissertation that accounts for why your music is doing what it's doing? Do you still have to do that?
No, we can, we analyze another, like we can analyze one of our own works, but we have to do a detailed analysis of someone else's work.
Somebody else.
And so it's, yeah, so it's analysis heavy, yeah, which is great. And I think it is right, but it's interesting, you know, that conversation of, you know, that abstracting, like what do you abstract from you know, that analysis of the music itself. So, yeah. Okay. But we actually have a couple of questions, which is great. So Joan, so in August, EUYO is going to play one of your pieces, Rising for String Quartet and Flute. Could you give us some advice on how to think about it or how to look at the piece? It would be really helpful to have some ideas before we start practicing together. So Mikhail, thank you.
Okay. I first of all, thank you for learning this piece, and thank you to the flutist for suggesting it, or whoever did suggest it. It's a piece about rising, so going up. My music is very much about action, going up, going down, holding, which is actually everything that music does, and that it either holds, goes up, or goes down. So I've been studying that for a long time, and I keep putting it more and more forward. So what I would just suggest is when you start rehearsing, just start noticing that. When is something going up? How is it going up slowly, fast, loudly? What is the tension that's being created by that action? You know, it's going to take you a while to get to that. Just start playing the music and then start noticing when you're rising, what's below it? Is there a texture below it? Is it just holding? What is it? Just notice things like that. That may help you play it better. May not. That's it for now.
Has asked, was it really commissioned by Absolute Vodka? They've supported many things and pieces that were so important for the history of modern music, not just in pop culture. How did that come about? Was it commissioned by Absolute Vodka?
Yes. My second fanfare was commissioned by Absolute Vodka. I only now drink Absolute Vodka.
Do they send you free samples?
Usually I drink a red wine, but when I go to liquor, it's Absolute Vodka. Yeah, it was just one of the people who was commissioning at that time, and they did a lot of commissioning, and I thank them for doing that, because those are the people that can help pay for things. So yeah.
How do you think commissioning will change? You know, in the future. You know, obviously we've been through, and we're still going through, you know, global changes, which are certainly affecting our industry and, you know, commissioning structures and, you know, all of these things. So it's great to hear about, you know, Absolute Vodka doing their part for, you know, for commissioning works by living composers, but how do you envisage things changing, or, you know, the industry having to remodel itself?
Well, you know, corporate funding is pretty low. Absolute vodka, that's pretty unusual. Reader's Digest did something at one point. Ford did a big project at one point. But the one that was very significant to me was in Tampa, Florida. They opened an island called, and they asked me to write for the opening piece, which the orchestra was going to play on the island. And I think Gerald Ford came down. He was the president. It was a big deal. There were like 10,000 people there. You couldn't hear my piece at all because it was outdoors and the speakers were like 50 feet high, and it was terrible. It was terrible. But this guy, who was the developer behind the island, decided he was going to commission lots of new works for that island. So the hotels had all new sculptures in them. Paintings were all over the place, garden things, music. And I went to that guy, and I actually dedicated the piece to that guy. And I said, you know, that's really good thinking, that part of this grand amount of money that you're putting forward is going to new creative artists, and you're putting them inside these big projects. I thought that was a great idea. And that should be done more, because it adds value to the project in a big way, and it helps the artist too get paid to do new work. We don't have many places. We have very few commissioning organizations. We're among the poorest artists, I think, in the planet, except next to the poets. But I like that idea, actually. I don't like the money being too far into it, like in the art world. The money is deeply in there.
Yeah, that's true. And it's interesting navigating, which I alluded to earlier, navigating the differences between the UK and Europe and the United States as well, and the different support mechanisms. And I know that, you know, my colleagues at Columbia who are interested in writing for orchestra, I mean, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but not everyone has a desire to work with art form for various reasons, which perhaps we can touch on next. But the difficulty of, you know, not even getting commissions, but having a way into working with orchestras. And I know there are some, you know, calls for scores and things, but you know, just it is, you know, it's a different system and network of working, and I find that quite interesting. But and I wonder whether the desire, or the seemingly, you know, less of a desire to work with orchestras from some of my colleagues comes from the fact that you know, that the culture of music making and being a music creator, from what I've seen in New York, a lot of it is you know, DIY and having to do it yourself, you know, a bit like what I did with The Knife of Dawn, because, you know, to a certain extent, you know, I found that there were lots of conversations about, it was actually Otello, because every time there was a new production of Otello, there was the same discussion and, you know, news article about whether, you know, the main character would be blacked up or not, and, you know, the usual discussion surrounding that particular work. And I was just like, well, actually, maybe we just need to have more works that are written for a diverse, like specifically for a diverse cast. And so that was, you know, my way of doing that. And it's almost as though that piece was created out of the circumstance that you know, in the environment, the creative environment that I found myself in. And I wonder whether a lot of what I'm seeing, you know, specifically, you know, being in New York City, comes from the environment of how, you know, music is supported and funded and created. Yeah.
Yeah. New York is a tough place. I know I lived there for a long time, but it's an exciting place because so much going on, and there's so much going on in new music that is so different. When I was there were 3 styles: uptown, midtown, and downtown. Uptown was Schoenberg, Babbitt, and that group. Midtown was Barber, Copeland, and that group. Downtown was Cage, Feldman, that group. So the 3 were extremely different. I just happened to be in the Uptown group because I was going to Columbia, and I wasn't very comfortable with that group. I left it after 10 years. I lasted 10 years. Too long. Too long. I gravitated downtown to Midtown. I didn't get all the way down. But it's changed. Columbia's changed, I think, in that respect. Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there are still references to those divisions. Actually, it came up in one of our conversations, but also because I don't know what it was like when you were there, but now it is such an international environment that, you know, when we come in and there are references to uptown, midtown, downtown, it's like, you know, well, the response to that was, well, actually, we're having, you know, an influx of people from, you know, an international cohort of people who are coming in with hopefully, you know, new ideas. And I remember even when I was at Conservatoire in London at the Royal College of Music, and you know, talking about the development and the fact that it did really feel as though, to a certain extent, I mean, obviously when you're younger, you feel as though you might feel as though there's a pressure to write in certain ways, but I suppose it didn't really feel as though it was coming from the institution itself. It felt as though as individuals, we could find our own way of developing a unique writing style and a unique way of writing our own music, which is really encouraging. And I would say that's certainly the case at Columbia, and everyone's writing in completely different ways, and that is supported, which is, you know,
that's amazing. Great. I'm glad to hear that about both the Royal College and Columbia, that you have that option, because it reflects what's going on. I mean, for the first time in history, we have so many styles going on, so many options, which is freeing up the choices. It's harder because you have so many choices, and you wind up in a community that's doing one kind of thing, and maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you should be in the other communities. So you eventually, hopefully, find that out, that you're in the wrong community. You know, it's not quite your style. You know, so I think composers today have a lot of good choices, but my recommendation is that they start their own group. And that's what a lot of us did. I did. I started the Da Capo Chamber Players. Steve Rice started his Rice Ensemble. Phil Glass started. There's a whole series of composers who started their own ensembles to create their own vision of music. And they did it in very different ways. Bang on a Can did it in a different way. They don't play, they present. Some play, some conduct, some just present. There are many, many models. But I think young composers need to do that, because it creates a place where they can, once they get out of school, once that umbrella's gone, they have their own environment to make music in. And I really strongly suggest that they do that more than anything else.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is about, well, it's interesting discussing it within this context, this orchestral context, because it is about I think you're right, it's about creating music and being a music creator rather than, you know, waiting for commissions and opportunities to come to you, which is, you know, very much how the orchestral model works, because it would be difficult to say, oh, I want to write something for orchestra. I'll
start my own.
Do it myself. Yeah.
Some have done that. Yeah.
That's true.
Dr. Marin
Yeah.
also started her own orchestra when she couldn't get conducting jobs. So she started her own orchestra. So did Sarah Caldwell, Antonia Brico, and another woman in opera in New York, Eve Quayler.
Yes,
they started their own orchestras in order to conduct. Yeah.
Oh, we have another question, which is great. What kind of compositions drew more attention? So what kinds of compositions draw more attention and recognition in the music world? So either commissioned works or works that you didn't really plan for anyone, but I think maybe music that you just wanted to write.
You know, that's a complex question. I'll answer the first part. I think strong music that lasts, that has repeated performances, and that's for a reason, because the players like it, so they keep playing. This has happened with the pieces, and I started to realize that it was the music that was calling the shots. In other words, the strong music has its own PR. You know what I mean? Like Beethoven's Seventh has a very strong PR value because it's a strong piece. Whereas some of his his earlier band music and stuff like that, hardly ever gets played. But and also the symphonies have their different. The ninth gets played a lot. The second doesn't get played that much. You know, so there's a strength in the music itself that propels things forward. I believe that very strongly. That if you write a really good solo flute piece, like Varese did, at Density, it will be played a long time, and that's what's carrying him forward. That piece, that little 2-page solo flute piece, and Ionization, and 2 other pieces. That's it. That's moving him forward in history. I believe that very strongly. The music has its own power. And I don't know whether it's commissioned or just you write it out of inspiration. I don't think it makes too much of a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I rarely write. Well, you know, it's interesting being at Columbia because there is a certain freedom for however many years that I'm there that I can, like, the main aim is to, well, the main aim is to always to write the best music you possibly can. But really, rather than, you know, thinking about works that, you know, are or aren't commissioned, actually being in an environment where you're supported to create, that you can write what you want to write and take that element of risk that, you know, that you were talking about earlier, and the risk that, you know, some orchestras might feel in commissioning new works by living composers, is that actually, you know, being in an environment like Columbia, you can take the risks that you might not ordinarily be offered through a commission, and certainly through orchestral commissions. So I don't know about you, but I certainly, I think I feel the pressure of that risk, and probably because I worked in arts management for so long, like for about 13 years back in the UK when I was starting out my writing career. I was also working as an arts manager in the industry, so I'm well aware of the, you know, the costs and the implications behind commissioning new works. And so I always think, you know, so for example, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I want to do this musically, but in order to make it practical for it to be performed again, I might not do this thing because I don't know, because there might be pushback or it might prevent it from being performed again, and you know, things like that. And I don't know whether, you know, it's silly to think that way, but you know, I do, and I think in ways that I wouldn't necessarily think about if I was writing for smaller forces, or if I'm writing for an ensemble, a professional New York ensemble that Columbia is working with, who know what they're getting up to. Like, it feels as though it is purposefully, the environment at Columbia, for example, is like a lab, and it's about experimentation and risk and, you know, trying things out, which is great. But whether you can get that in every setting is another question.
Oh, okay. I just lost you for a minute there.
Oh, okay.
All right. Can you hear me?
Do you need me to? Yes. Do you need me to repeat anything?
You can hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
It's getting fuzzy.
Oh no. Do you need me to repeat anything?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Practicality is not the same thing as they're writing it. I would recommend writing for practical instruments, time-wise, that kind of stuff. You know, you don't want 4 marimbas and orchestra or you know, 6 harps, and that kind of thing is impractical. It's just very impractical. Why bother? It's only going to be played once, if that. You know what I mean? So I'm very practical. But the risk comes in the music. You know, in other words, you're taking risks inside the solo flute piece or inside the string quartet or whatever. I think, but it's good to write practically, because otherwise it won't get played. 6 harps probably won't get played again, right?
Yeah, that's true. So how, I suppose, you know, maybe I'm asking how, you know, what might risk in the music look like, and how far would you push it in an orchestral setting?
Well, you know, when you're writing a piece of music, I think you know what a risk is. You say, if I make this note 8 beats, that's a long note. Maybe I'll just make it 4. I'll be on the safe side. Because I can't hold that note that long. That's a risk. That's the kind of risk I'm talking about. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Cool. Well, I think we're coming to the end of the session. So I wonder if there are any more questions that anyone might have that you can feed through to the chat. And maybe in the meantime, Joan, if there isn't, or if there's something that you think that we didn't cover, that we could just maybe wrap up on. I know we had some technical difficulties at the beginning, so maybe, I don't know if I missed something that was probably groundbreaking, that you know, it's a shame to have missed. But is there anything else that you think we can touch on?
I guess we're done. We're done.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, from my point of view, I think we covered everything, and found it just a really fascinating conversation. I think it is really interesting thinking about how we have one other question, but I'll just maybe wrap up on this point. I mean, it is always, it's a conversation of how orchestras operate in the modern day, and it will be interesting to see how our current global events might affect that even more. But I don't know about you, but I feel really encouraged by the situation, in that I'm still having interesting conversations with orchestras, and I feel really grateful for, it's probably built on work and connections that I've made over the past 10 or 15 years or whatever, but it does feel as though I'm still having open and interesting conversations with orchestras, and I'm still very much in love with the art form. And as I said at the beginning, I think it was a slow love to grow, because it is, as a young composer, it is incredibly daunting to just not even creating the music, just logistically, it's such a daunting prospect. And so now that my love is firm and secure, it's not even not worth bearing about thinking, that might change. But we actually have a great question to end on. Someone's asked if there are some compositions that we should look forward to next year from both of us. So, Joan, do you have any exciting new work?
I had 3 premieres postponed.
Oh, no.
One was by the New York Philharmonic, one by the Boston Chamber Music Society Viola Quintet, and the third one was for the church, Fanfare for All Souls.
Oh, wow.
Unitarian Church, All Souls. So I'm looking forward to those pieces being heard sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Cello concerto. I'm writing a cello concerto now.
Oh, great. Oh, fantastic.
What about you?
Lots of things postponed.
What about you?
Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but the new piece for EUYO, which will hopefully be done next year, called Nexus, and I'm genuinely excited about that, because it was inspired by thinking, writing in reflection to Beethoven and his life and works, because it's Beethoven 250 this year, and thinking about what I might write in response to that, and I just sort of drew together my ideas of being a European, being an African Caribbean European, and what myself as a composer might write in response to into the great composer Beethoven. So that was really interesting. And I'm kicking off a series of pieces inspired by Basquiat's Tuxedo artwork. And so the first one will be premiered this summer. And then essentially a whole load of solo and small chamber pieces will be inspired by that. So I'm looking forward to those things. Yeah. Cool. Well, great. Well, thanks.
Can you do this?
Oh yeah.
Who is that? That's Beethoven.
Oh really? I think I missed it. Oh, but there you go. So yeah, I think that's a great.
Anyway.
That's a great way to end. But Joan, thank you so much. Sorry?
I enjoyed.
Yeah, it was really lovely to. Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, it was really, really lovely to speak. It was a really, really fascinating conversation.
I hope that you and I can continue this talk. So can you send me your email or something?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be really lovely to continue talking. Yeah, it would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, and for your questions.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you.
Bratislav, thank you. Good luck with the